So welcome everyone. For me, the call today is a little bit early because in US, the time has shifted. I wonder if it's the same for you guys. But without stretching this whole thing too long, I want to introduce my guest today. So my guest today is Gloria Feldt. Hello, Gloria.
Hello, Christina. So good to be with you.
Thank you. Welcome to Mind Valley. Well, Mind Valley stage for the past few years, that has been the stage. So it's as stage as it gets. And before we go into the conversation today, because the conversation today has a very specific topic, it's a very interesting use of words. So we'll go into that. But I want to read out your bio because I might actually go into a little different topic meanwhile, because, you do work with women and with leadership. And that's a very interesting topic for me personally. But first, official stuff. So Gloria Feldt is an acclaimed expert on power and leadership, a best-selling author and in-demand keynote speaker. She's co-founder and president of Take the Lead, whose mission reflects her life's passion to prepare, develop, and inspire women to take their fair and equal share of leadership positions by 2025. Gloria is the former CEO of Planned Parenthood and the best-selling author of 5 books. The latest is Intentioning: Sex, Power, Pandemics, and How Women Will Take the Lead. And the conversation today is going to be about intentioning, and the topic is intentioning your superpower. As I said, I'm very passionate about actually topics, about women, about feminism, and as one aspect of that is women in power, because I think, no matter how many presidents and prime ministers women we have, I still feel that we're so massively underrepresented almost on every layer of our society. I've even come across some statistics that even when women get into parliament, their ability to influence the discussion is less than that of men, just because of the way the work functions. So Gloria, how did you come to that topic? What brought you there? Was it, I don't know, was it your personal experience or your personal journey that made you so passionate about women in leadership, or is it more like philosophical academic approach to that?
You know, I think there's always a story. There's always a personal story behind everything that we do, whether we realize it or not, whether we acknowledge it or not. And certainly in my case, there was. I grew up in small Texas towns where women weren't given aspirations for leadership or, to have a career even. They told us if we went to college, it was to get our MRS. So we were supposed to marry young, have lots of children, be the support system for everyone else. And I really bought that whole cultural message. And it took a while to get out of it. I married my high school sweetheart. I had 3 children by the time I was just more than 20. And somehow, don't ask me how, I woke up. It was like a light bulb went off. And I suddenly realized, you're a smart kid. You were always a smart kid. You liked school. But you have no employable skills right now. If you ever have to support these children, there's nothing you could do. You have no way of doing that. So I started to community college at that time. And there was only a community college where I was living. And so I couldn't finish my degree. So it took me 12 years to finish my degree. But in that time, during that time, I had the opportunity to do some community service work. And I got involved in the civil rights movement in the US, in which I discovered 2 things. I had 2 big epiphanies. One was people working together, even if they don't have formal power, can change anything. You can make change if you get with like-minded people. It doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter. Obviously, if you have wealth and power, you can do it more easily, but you can do it even if you don't have those things. The other thing I noticed was that women were actually doing all of the frontline work and the men were getting all the leadership positions and the credit. And I thought to myself, I started looking around and noticing then how disparate it was in our society in terms of what women were doing versus what men were doing. And yet I saw these incredibly capable women all around me. So it was really at that time that I thought, I'm going to devote myself to women's equality in some way or another. And that was how it happened. So it happened fairly early. I guess I was in my mid-20s, but it's obviously, it expresses itself in many different ways during the course of my life.
So again, because you know that I live in Estonia, so my cultural background is a little different from most people in Mindvalley, actually most of Mindvalley's audience, and I have a feeling that being, well, if I can use the word feminist, is not very fashionable right now, even if in the Western affluent countries, people are quite at peace with that phenomenon. But I often hear the idea that it's not as relevant anymore. I mean, you have all the rights, you have all the equal opportunities. Is that really irrelevant at that time? Or as I was trying to push my agenda that I think we should have more women in leadership, how important do you think this question is for contemporary society? And even in US, I would say, the country which is fairly equal for a lot of people.
As you can see by the mission of Take the Lead, my organization, I think it's relevant until we are at 50-50, at or thereabout, close to that, especially in pay and in positions, in top leadership positions. Now, women are now about 50% of the workforce in the US, and I suspect in Western Europe, at least, it's fairly similar. But in terms of the top leadership positions before the pandemic, we were pushing on to 25%. But much of the data says that the pandemic has pushed women's progress back. So we don't yet have another study, but I'm guessing that it's now back to under 25%. And the thing is, the business case is very clear that companies with more women in their leadership make more money. Governments with more women in their leadership are more peaceful. The women.
Is there statistics that proves that? Because we still
yes,
it's like we talk. It's a correct way to talk about that this way. But still, when you go into real life, you will hear guys saying that, yeah, I get it, but my young employees, women, will want to get married and get children, and I obviously won't prefer them.
Oh, let's talk about that.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Because certainly that is a big issue for women, and it should be for men as well. And I think it is more so for men now than it used to be. I see so many more younger men who want to be part of their children's lives, and they would like to see the changes that women have been asking for many years. But they're afraid to say so. They're often afraid to take paternity leave. Because they're afraid that they will be looked down upon. And so the thing is that the systems need to change now. The systems need to change. The institutions we work in were designed by men for men who had women at home taking care of the home and the children and all of that. Well, most families are not structured that way anymore. Most of the time, families have two earners, and during at least most of the time. And so when children are born, it is true that the burden, if you want to call it a burden, or the joy of childbearing it's both. having children, I can say it is both of those. The burden still falls on women primarily for all kinds of caregiving, not just childcare, but elder care, taking care of sick family members. That all
sick husbands,
sick husbands, whatever. That all just needs to change, and we need to insist upon that change. And I actually believe that the disruption of the pandemic times has given us the best opportunity we will have in our lifetimes to make big structural changes, because right now companies are begging for women to come back to work, and they're like, no, I don't need that. I don't, that culture was not made for me. I don't need that. I'm going to start my own business, or I'm going to, do something different. And so there's, as they say, the great rethink going on right now. Well, the great rethink is the signal for organizations to rethink their structures. And they can do that. We now know you can work from anywhere, right?
Yeah.
We know you can work flexibly. You can work, you can work the hours that work for you. You can take care of your family and get your work done. So now that has been proven. And I think if we insist upon it, we'll make that systemic change.
So before I'll go into the next question, I want to have a little, so for guys who are from Mindvalley, you'll be able to appreciate that. On Monday, my son actually got sick in the school. So the school called me to pick him up, but I happened to be in shower at that time and left my phone outside. So by the time I was done with the shower, they actually pulled Vishen out of his meeting. He dropped everything and went to pick up my son and drop him home. So I'm sure Mindvalley people will appreciate that the big founder Vishen had to perform childcare duties on Monday while I was in the shower. I wasn't actually gainfully employed. But jokes aside, I read somewhere also very interesting thing that a huge chunk of productivity of any society is produced by women, but it is just under the radar because it's not calculated into GDP. But let's say if it's care work or housework or any of that, that is actually also production. I know that because I lived in Asia for 16 years and I paid for these services. So I know that this is production. So has pandemic changed anything in our perception of what how much actually women produce outside the office?
Initially, and I don't know if this learning has changed as much as I would like for it to change, but I remember initially so many men saying, oh, now I get it. It's not so easy to be home all day with the children. It's not so easy to be taking care of the house and the cooking and the, and so men were actually getting a dose of what women have done. And of course, I don't know about you, but I know for so much of my life, I was doing all of that plus working. Yes. And the men were, they were experiencing it, so they understood it on a more visceral level. Whether that is actually changing things, I don't know. I know that I do have talked with a number of men who are not so happy to go back to the office 5 days a week. They don't mind 2 or 3 days, but they've come to like the flexibility and like being able to do things with their children. And, I think the pressures will be on to, I don't think we'll ever go back to the old 9 to 5 in the office, work 10 hours a day routine. I just don't think so.
Meanwhile, I want to go back to the intended conversation topic, which is intentionality. Is that also, well, what is it?
So I made up a word, intentioning. Yeah. Intentioning to express what I want to see it being, which is intention is a wonderful word, and we talk about it a lot, and it's important, but it is a noun, and I felt that there needed to be an active verb form of intention to signal that really it's the action that makes the difference. Ultimately, it's you can have all the intention in the world, but if you don't take action, one of my favorite phrases is from a humorist, Will Rogers, who said, even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there. So intentioning is saying it's good to have ambition. Ambition is the fuel. It's I hope, I wish, I want, I would like to do these things. Intention is I see it, I'm going to be doing it. And intentioning is I am doing it. I have taken those steps, I have begun. So that's what it is. And
so it's like action with intention, like matched together, or?
Well, so I talk about the VCA method of intentioning, which is really 3 things. It's vision. You have to know what your end goal is. Where do you want to be? What do you want to do? What's the purpose that you have? And in fact, my previous book, No Excuses, helped women understand and embrace their power. But I realized that that's just the first question. The next question is the power to what? What is your purpose? And so the vision answers that question. What is your purpose? And then the courage, you have to have the courage to believe that you can do it. And thirdly, the action, taking the action, whatever it might be, even if it's starting with one simple step. So vision, courage, and action equals intentioning.
Vision, courage, and action. Okay, so yeah, I missed a few bits. So is this something you're teaching, training other people? Is it attainable, or is it more characteristic, which some people have more of it and others less?
Oh, thank you so much for asking that question, because yes, I am. I have one course right now that is called the 9 Leadership Power Tools to Advance Your Career. And it is fully online, and it can be done with or without masterminds with me. But that one is based on that previous book that I mentioned, No Excuses. And I love that course. It helps women clarify what their goal is and make a plan for reaching it. Then I do expect to create a new course from the whole concept of intentioning this summer. And I'm not sure exactly what the structure of it will be yet, but if you are interested in learning more about it, if you go to my website, gloriafeldt.com/intentioning, you can actually download a workbook that goes with the book, and you can use it with or without the book, because it has a series of exercises and it's absolutely free. So you can get it there if you want to, and start learning the methodology of intentioning.
So you mostly work with women, as far as I understand, in terms of how to help them advance their career in this masculine and male-dominated world, right?
That is largely true. I do occasionally I do occasionally teach the same curriculum as an academic course, in which case I often have about 25% men. And leadership, as you know, is leadership. And so the same skills can always be applied. And in fact, I think it's very healthy and very helpful for men, because as we have seen, for example, the countries that have had women in their leadership have done a better job with the pandemic. And I mentioned previously, tend to be more peaceful, less likely to start conflicts. And so leading like a woman is one of the things that I teach, and both women and men can employ those skills. It has to do with many of the things that I think you teach at Mindvalley, which have to do with empathy and diversity, appreciating diversity and inclusion and empathy, and having these kinds of conversations. This is the wave of the future. This is, if the world is going to survive, this is what we're going to need to be and do.
So what does it mean to lead like a woman? How is it different? And maybe just for the context of why I'm asking that is, I read somewhere in the social theory in psychology that there is often this intrinsic conflict between your social role as a woman versus your social role as a leader, because society expects different characteristics of woman versus a leader. So when a woman is trying to be a good leader, she's either a bad woman, or, I'm very simplifying, or she's a bad leader because she's too much of a woman. That's where I'm coming from. What like is there a specific way to be a good leader as a woman? And if there is, what it is?
Well, there is that two-edged sword that you've just described. There's no question about it. It has happened because, I mean, one of the biggest social changes in the history of the world has been women moving into leadership in large numbers. I mean, think about it. This affects the entire population of the world. And it's a huge power shift. And it's what we need to start with understanding. And this is a core piece of every bit of the work that we do at Take the Lead, which is to understand that the old narrative of power, which has been the power over wars and fighting and assuming scarce resources, that is no longer even functional in an economy that is largely driven by brains and innovation and creativity, not by sheer physical strength anymore. I mean, perhaps 60 million years ago, that was functional. Even 60,000 years ago, it was functional. It is not so functional anymore. And so I believe we're ready for that kind of a shift. Or I'm not going to say ready. I'm going to say it's essential that we make that shift if we're going to survive as a species now. So it is true that women have that double-edged sword, because there is this phenomenon that is called stereotype threat, which is that if you've been acculturated in a certain way, and that's the expectation people have of you, if you behave differently outside of that range of behaviors, you are judged negatively.
Yeah.
So here's the way I look at it. You're going to be judged negatively either way. You know, if they're going to think you're not powerful enough because you don't act powerful, that's bad. If they think you're bad or bitchy because you are assuming that you're looking like you have power and they don't like you, well, so what? You know, either way, you're going to be judged. So you might as well be judged in a way that drives progress forward. And the truth is that power itself has no attributes. It's like a hammer. You can build something with it, or you can break something apart. It's what we do with it. And so I really focus on, whether it's men or women that I'm speaking to, emphasizing that principle, that if we think of power as being the power to, then it becomes a generative, creative, innovative power that there's no limit to that. We don't have to fight over the crumbs of that pie, because that pie is limitless, just like love is limitless, or intelligence is limitless. You know, look at the technology that we're using right now. Human innovation and creativity is pretty much boundless. We seem to be able to figure out solutions to almost everything. And so let's use that as our power. And so, you know, the name that you chose for this conversation was intentioning is your superpower, right?
Yes.
And so that brings me to this next thing that I want to just mention to you, which is that none of this is hardwired. It's all socially learned. It's all socially learned. Men are not better than women. Women are not better than men. Neither is smarter. Neither is a better leader inherently. But the way women have been socialized has now given us superpowers if we recognize them. And those superpowers are that even today, little girls tend to be spoken with in terms of their behavior toward others and how they're impacting others, whereas little boys tend to be spoken to about how strong they are, how, you know, they can be, you know, messy, and that's fine, and whatever. The girls are rewarded for being able to stand in line. Nobody expects a boy to stand in line ever. So these are but these are qualities that now are serving us very well and give us empathy. And empathetic leaders, we now know, are much more likely to be successful in leading organizations. They give us more of a collaborative way of looking at things and dealing with things. They also give us, I apologize for that. My husband promised me he would be picking up the phone, but yeah, he did not. So apologies. This is the way it is at home right now. These are, you know, these are qualities that the other one is really important, which is that anytime you have not been the group in power, you, as basically a defense mechanism, must learn to read the room. You develop these ways of sort of, that empathy becomes a way that you can read the room. You begin to understand what's going on underneath the surface. You kind of get a sense of how people are feeling, as well as what they're saying and what it means. So that's what, you know, when I say leading like a woman, that's what I mean. And obviously men can learn those skills. And the best male leaders today, look at Zelensky. Those are exactly the qualities he is exhibiting. Empathy for his people, an ability to like read what's going on with even his adversaries.
Yes.
the way he speaks, the way he speaks to even his adversaries. Those are the qualities of a woman leader.
Yeah, I was actually quite struck by a quote by him yesterday that I read, where he turned to Russian soldiers and said, "Put your arms down, and we'll show you how humans are to be treated."
Exactly.
Which was I was like, wow, that's in the time of overwhelming blind hatred. It just sounded so refreshing from somebody who's leading probably the most unjustly treated country in the world right now. But and thank you, by the way, for acknowledging the situation, because yes, we're very close to Ukraine, and for us in Estonia, it's a very very close to the heart and to the home war, also partially because we were part of Soviet Union, something that not a lot of countries have experienced. But that aside, I want to come back to the women in leadership. So I absolutely agree that our feminine qualities are our superpowers, but I think when it comes to power, official power, right, there has to be some kind of acknowledgement. So you may advance or succeed with a group of people, with a team of people, even with your work. But if society is not ready to reward you with responsibility for you exhibiting these superpowers, do you still need to assume those masculine qualities to claim it, to claim the leadership position, or is it possible to not put on the mask of something which is maybe not yours intrinsically, and maybe if I am a woman through and through, can I still get into leadership position without becoming a little bit a man?
Generally speaking, what you see is that the first women into a previously all male environment will almost inevitably take on, as they say, the plumage of the birds that they're flying with.
Yes.
Again, it's a defense mechanism. It's a way of surviving in that place. But that's why it's important to have more than one woman. So it's extremely important to have more than one woman, say, on a leadership team. And the more we see women in power, the more normalized it becomes, and the more it becomes normal for whatever women's behavior is, that it may be a little different from men, the more both the men and the women will begin to appreciate. Again, it's not that anyone is better. And I think it's the best teams. It's not just me. I think it's probably there's probably data to back this up, but the best teams tend to have a great diversity of people on them, and not just gender, but ethnicity and whatever, like geography, if that's important in that organization.
Age.
Yes, exactly. Age, everything, because you get different perspectives, and that leads to more creativity and innovation, which in turn can help any organization stay more in tune with its constituency. And so these are really important factors. And I believe that, authenticity is one of the most important leadership qualities. And sometimes it's hard. And so sometimes for women, the biggest barrier is in our own mind, because we have had to deal with so much implicit bias and explicit bias.
Yeah.
And it's really, really much easier. It takes so much energy sometimes to fight that, or to act in spite of it. I understand that completely. But if one generation can stay in the game and change the game, then the path will be so much smoother for our daughters and our granddaughters. And that's what my intentioning is about. I mean, that's why I encourage women to take on these challenges, even if they're hard, because we can make life so much better for other women as they come along. And I want to get back to the point that you raised about being your authentic self, because people follow people with a point of view. People follow people who are authentic. You can always tell when someone is not when they're faking it. You can always tell that. Or they may be able to get away with it for a while, but ultimately, I think there was a poet who said something like, "You will be found out if you sing a song that is not your own." And that is so true. It's also much easier. You don't have to remember.
Prepare.
That's right. You don't have to remember what you said. You just have to be yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, if we can take those masks off, we will be better. We will be healthier psychologically and emotionally ourselves. And if the rest of the world doesn't accept us, that's too bad, because we can still accomplish whatever we want to accomplish. And it's just, I have just found this so many times that if I don't follow that authentic instinct that I have, or that authentic person that I am, the values that I hold, that's when I trip up. That's when I make mistakes. And that's when people can see right through me.
I totally resonate with the message that it's super easy to be just you. So we have 2 questions that came in. So if anybody of the two people who asked the question wants to join us, please, I think I will give them a chance in a moment. But first I have to ask a slightly unfair question. Unfair because I do not know if you've researched, and maybe you don't have the numbers, or maybe you do have the numbers, but I want to ask this. So if we still have so few women in leadership position, well, official leadership position, who's standing in our way? Is it me because I'm not intentioning? I'm not doing the work? Is it the men who don't like women next to them in power? Or is it the women who are not used to follow other women? I know I'm asking this question a little unfairly, but what's your take on that? What stands usually in the way of a woman taking on the leadership position?
That's not an unfair question at all. And it's actually the question that led me into the work that I'm doing right now with Take the Lead. I was not anticipating starting an organization in the third act of my life, but I realized that I had figured out what that linchpin is that is keeping women back. And there still are lots of external barriers. There's no question about it. They still exist, but they're not that hard to overcome if you can clear your own mind and get clear about the barriers that are in your mind. Here's an example of when I realized this. I found that there have been various experiments that have been done that have found that women will work 20% longer than men before they think they have earned their pay. The women, when asked to value their work and other people's work, women tend to value other people's work about 20% more than they value their own work. There is a website called ZipRecruiter where you can post your job openings and people can post their resumes if they're looking for jobs. And they looked at 100,000 applications or resumes. And what they found was that women asked for over $11,000 on average, less than men, for the same jobs. So society hasn't valued women, and that has inculcated in us less valuing of ourselves. Now, nobody can fix that for us but us. We do have to do the work, and it's not that hard work. Just take a piece of paper and start listing out what your points of power are. What do you bring? Is it education? Well, women have been earning 57% of the college degrees for years, decades. Is it financial wherewithal? You may not have as much in your bank account, but women buy 85% of the consumer goods and products, or make the decisions for the family. So we have the power of the purse if we choose to use it. These are things that we have, these skills, we have these powers, we have, we just don't always realize that we have them. I mean, we just had Equal Pay Day in the United States yesterday, and women still earn just about 20% less than men. Well, if you don't ask, you don't get. That's what my daddy used to tell me. If you don't ask, you don't get. And that we women are less likely to ask. Women are less likely to raise their hand and say, I want that job. Women are less likely to self-advocate. So these are behaviors that we can change ourselves, and nobody can change that for us. That's not a systems change. That is stuff we have to change ourselves.
Mm. Thank you. I know that this is the topic I could keep asking and asking and asking, but I have Berta here, who is also dressed in red. It's some unannounced topic. Berta, I'm going to switch off my microphone and pass the microphone to you so that you get to ask the question. And thank you for joining us.
Hi, Berta.
Hi. I actually have many questions. Just the first part, when you're talking about, I had that concern that how, how men are coming home and who's the boss here, who is it the job is going to continue at home and the fathers will not be able to be whatever percentage of fatherhood they have at home. That was originally my questions, but you bring in a lot more that I wish I could change. There are many questions that I have.
Berta, you have the microphone. You get to ask the questions.
And we are all in red because red is our power color. So you're in great shape.
Yeah. The fathers have to learn how to be mothers. You see,
I love that.
If they are going to be, if we're going to be, I understand why we are probably more in the emotions and so forth. They're very different than men, and so men have to learn to be conscious parents. We haven't learned how to be conscious mothers, and we in some way hurt our children in ways that we didn't know, you see. And then now with the new 21st century knowledge that is including the other part that was not included before, and we have been raised and worked with the only law, control, and command. Now we have the other part that is, that is represented by women, and men have to learn. Some have learned probably, and so there are many things we have to consider. My main concern is about children. You see, children, we need to prepare the new generations and try to change ways of parenting, be more conscious, and follow Dr. Shefali, probably in one word. You see, I am following actively. And so there are many concerns I have. If men has very little time to be a parent, you see, and women are going to leave, who is going to take care of the children? Women took so much practice trying to take initiative, were leaders at home, basically, because the man wasn't there, you see, was not able to be there. So there are conflicting situations. Who decides what? We don't decide, the bosses decide.
If I can jump in and just say, in part, you just answered your question, which is we have to prepare the next generation. And as the next generation sees women taking leadership roles, they will have a better understanding of how power can be shared. And by sharing power, that starts in the home. So in one big sense, you have answered your own question. There's also, I think, a responsibility that women have to choose their partners wisely and to negotiate before having children. Who's going to do what? And obviously in past generations, I know I didn't know to do that. But I see my children having much more shared interest in their children. So it starts with who your partner is and negotiating before you have children, who's going to do what. And it also goes to having children who are prepared to understand, who hear the message, they see the message and they hear the message from you, that it's both parents' responsibility, if there are two parents, that it is both parents' responsibility to do childcare. So we're making this systemic change. There are other ways to deal with it as well. And I noticed there are there are many situations, particularly with single mothers, where several will come together and share supporting each other because they all have to be working. How do they take care of their children? Well, they help each other. They help each other with a sick child, or picking up somebody at school or going to the soccer game. So we humans have to think of new solutions to the old problem.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Berta. I know there are a few more questions, and I'm a little bit more liberal today, and I'm allowing, I'm going to hope to allow more people to ask the questions. Meanwhile, as you were answering, I was also thinking about, the example that you just brought about women helping each other, but that's still women trying to help other women. It's not a systemic change per se, because the government doesn't care about that. Obviously, of course, it's different. In Europe, the regulations are very different from US, and I'm privileged to be in Europe, where we're a little bit more egalitarian when it comes to female responsibilities. But still, how can we shift it from women taking care of each other to the society taking care of that?
Well, it's, again, the pandemic, and I don't want to be too rosy about this because there's a lot of work yet to be done from a political perspective. But I never in my lifetime thought I would hear the words infrastructure and childcare uttered in the same sentence. And that is now, we talk about it that way in the United States, that we need an infrastructure that includes childcare and elder care and just caregiving in general. So it's now at least an object of discussion. But ultimately, honestly, and again, you gave the answer in your question almost, which is that ultimately it is a matter of public policy. And public policy is determined by the people who elect the people who make the public policy. So I right now feel very concerned about how people are disengaged from politics and from civic life. And I think it's just extremely important for people to understand that being engaged in public policy development, in civic life, in voting, in choosing who runs for office, in deciding maybe you're going to run for office sometime. These are things that are almost as important as as negotiating with your partner about who's going to take care of the children, because what public policy does make a huge difference for us. And again, as I mentioned, we had Equal Pay Day in the US yesterday, and I will in 2 weeks, I guess, or no, next week, I will be interviewing 2 women who have changed policy about equal pay in the US. And one of them is Lilly Ledbetter, who changed policy by suing her company when she found out she wasn't getting paid the same as men in the same job. And she then her name is on a law called the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. That was the first piece of legislation Barack Obama signed. And all it does is say companies have to be transparent about their pay policies. You have to, people need to be able to know what other people are making. And those are public policy things that we have to have elected officials who will support those kinds of policies. The other person I'll be interviewing is Cindy Guerra Robbins, who changed corporate policy. She was the chief people officer for Salesforce, the big tech company.
Yeah.
And she noticed that there were pay disparities, and she went to their CEO and persuaded him that he needed to do a study, and that he did. And they discovered that there were disparities in pay for the same job between men and women. So they changed their corporate policy. So there are 2 different ways that you can change policy, but we cannot disengage ourselves from policymaking.
I actually, first I want to ask if there's anybody who wants to join us. And I do have a follow-up question, because there is such a phenomenon where even well-intending men might not always know of what of the perspective of a woman, just because women do certain things, like, for example, pregnancy. There was this example, I don't remember which company it was, but it was probably Google or somewhere, where only when one of the female executive team members became pregnant, they realized that their pregnancy parking was not in the right spot. And what I'm talking about is, but isn't it important also for women to make it to the leadership positions, for these topics to even be considered, or the right kind of questions to be asked? Because we can vote for the policies, but if the policies don't even surface, then there's nothing to vote for. I mean, you can say yes, but yes,
absolutely, absolutely, yes. And that's another reason. That's another good reason why we need to. So March is Women's History Month, right? In the US. And we need to understand that with our actions every day, we are making tomorrow's history. And so one of the ways we can make history is by even talking about the need for for those things like pregnancy, special parking for pregnant women. What a small thing that is for a company to do, and yet it's really helpful. If you think about the question of what would our institutions be designed like if women had designed them,
yes,
I think that's a really interesting exercise for people to do and for leaders to do, like just to think about it, both men and women. What if women had designed this organization? What would it be like? So for women to stay in organizations and become leaders, that's one important thing. I also think it's important for women to start their own companies and make them big enough that their companies will have the impact, and they will be able to design that company and design the culture in that company. And the more we see, and we're seeing more and more of it every day, especially as, again, part of this whole big great resignation and great rethink, is that a lot of women are simply deciding, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I'm going to start my own company so I can do things the way I think they should be done. And as we see a few of those companies become very large, we will, I think, see some big shifts in how men and women are treated and thought of and cared for within those organizations. I'm intentioning that to be true.
And I really love your attitude of, it's we can take it into our hands and make it happen. We have Laura here and a little bit of time left, so I'll let Laura join us and ask the question. As you can tell, I have enough questions to go, but I want to give an opportunity to Laura. Are you here with us?
I am, and thank you so much. The discussion has been fantastic. What I wanted to ask you to drill down to, if you wouldn't mind, Gloria, is we understand men and women definitely lead very differently. Can you give some concrete examples of how women lead that is very different from how men lead, and the importance of those specific areas that women may be better leaders than men, that we could help impart on to our spouses, our coworkers, and more importantly, our children, so that they can learn to be better leaders as well, understanding that men and women definitely lead differently.
Yes, and also, Laura, none of this is true for everybody, because there is there is kind of a bell curve of characteristics, and some women have more of these qualities than others, and some men have more of these qualities than other men. So I don't want to overgeneralize on things, but the kinds of behaviors that we want to, and attributes that we want to encourage are, I know every time a man asks me, what's the thing I could do that would really help more women get into leadership? And I always say, listen, just listen. And that's one of the attributes. That's one of the things that women have been acculturated to do. And that is to listen to other people first before jumping off and making decisions, and not assuming that we have the privilege to just do what we think needs to be done without listening to what other people. And so that often gets defined as empathy. And I think a part of that is empathy. You were asking for examples, and that's a really good question. And I'm wishing that I had some better ones at my fingertips. But I do think that, again, I just look at the aggregated data, and the aggregated data finds that companies that have more women in their leadership have higher return on investment and higher return on equity. And that to me should be about enough. I mean, there's anywhere from a 5 to 20% differential. So it simply is good business to have a substantial number of women in leadership, precisely because of that diversity. There's also data that has found that when you add a woman to, or women to a group that has previously been all male, it literally raises the group intelligence. And it's not that women are smarter. It is, again, that we're bringing this kind of emotional intelligence and the empathy and the ability to read the room. That's what makes the difference. It's not that we're smarter inherently by any means. So the aggregate data is easier to find than individual examples, but you've asked a really good question, and I think I'm going to have to go research that and write an article about it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, for joining us, and thank you everyone actually for this wonderful discussion, because it's not just a discussion between me and Gloria, and I feel your participation. I do not read your comments very attentively, unfortunately, because it's small text and I want to listen to what's going on. But I have got a slightly sad news. We will have to empty the stage in 3 minutes because there is some technical problem with our stagers, and usually this is the busy time, so we can't go over time. I was so hoping that we'll be left alone here and we'll get to chat longer, unfortunately. So I'm going to do my usual routine before we finish. First of all, I want to ask everybody who is right now attending to leave a heart to my wonderful guest while we are finishing up here, so that we get to see the hearts coming in. And if you're watching it in recording, you'll leave the heart down there. I think it was such a wonderful discussion, so refreshing. I really like talking not just about certain theories, but just about life and society the way it is, and discussing things which matter, which is why I called it Honest Conversations initially. So Gloria, thank you so much. You are so wonderful conversation partner. I'd really want to see more of you here. But before we finish, is there something you would like to leave our listeners with? Some parting words?
I would like to leave particularly the women with the understanding of how much power we have, and to understand that power unused is power useless. And so it's all about how you actually embrace that power and use it for good, for your own good, for the good of society, for the good of the world altogether. So that is my main message. I would love to invite anyone to follow me and keep this conversation going on social media. I am at Gloria Feldt everywhere. You just have to remember my last name is Feldt, so that's a little bit confusing sometimes. And my website is gloriafeldt.com, and Take the Leads is taketheleadwomen.com. So please feel free to partake of all of the resources that we have. And I love this conversation. It's been absolutely fabulous. I cannot thank you enough. I can see why my daughter, I told you before we started, one of my daughters absolutely loves Mind Valley and participates all the time. So I now understand why, and I hope that we do have more opportunities to converse.
Yes, thank you so much. It was wonderful. I'm definitely following you on Instagram and I want to keep this conversation going. And yes, it was wonderful. And see you guys all in a week, hopefully. I'm glad we had this conversation in March. It's very meaningful. So thank you all very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.